Welcome to Real Talk. Today we have with us Sam Gamello from Olde Kinderhook Appraisal Services. Sam, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. We kind of go way back in the business.
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Right. So to kick things off, Sam, tell us, how did you get started in the business, and how long have you been doing this?
Well, I've been in the real estate appraisal business for 25 years.
Yeah.
So my father was an appraiser, and I was teaching in 98, 99 at Bishop McGinn High School in Albany
Okay.
as a phys ed and health teacher.
Fun fact, didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And during that time, he asked me if I wanted to come over and work with him. So I started taking the classes as an appraiser trainee, and during my time as a teacher, I was taking the classes to become an appraiser, and then after that 2 years, I started to work with him full-time in like 2000, 2001, right in that ballpark.
Wow. And you took over the business.
Eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, about 2010,
Okay.
the business got transferred into my name, and then he kind of went part-time, and now it's just myself, my brother, and my wife.
Oh, wonderful.
It's just the
Okay.
three of us. Yeah.
All right. Well, I know when I call, I'm lucky enough I always have you there.
Yeah.
So when we're on the other side of a deal and the appraiser is calling and it's you, we're like, oh, it's Sam. So
It's good
we're
to know.
very confident because we know what you're doing, with the appraisals. And some obviously can be tricky. But could you tell us in the public, what is an appraisal?
I mean, it's a simple answer. An appraisal is just an opinion of value. So it's in real estate, obviously, it's opinion of value of a piece of real estate.
Right.
And what goes into an appraisal, of course, we'll talk about. But the gist of it is, what I like everybody to know is that it is an individual's opinion of value. So it could alter from appraiser to appraiser. It's the value is not going to be the same, depending on the person that does the.
Right. But you have the data and the comps to back up to justify your numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we have to have access to, we have to be competent. That's one of the things that we have to follow as an appraiser.
Right.
So you guys follow your guidelines.
Right.
And one of the biggest things that we have to follow is called USPAP. It's a uniform standard of professional appraisal practice.
Okay.
And within USPAP, it states, are you competent in the market area? And you have to, the appraiser, you have to be able to say, yes, I am, before you take that assignment on.
Okay, so if somebody, an appraiser was coming from out of the area, that wouldn't really justify because they don't know this area. I'm sure you take that into consideration.
Yeah, so I mean, you could live somewhere else. I mean, we service as far south as Dutchess and Ulster,
Okay,
and as far north as Warren and Washington County.
okay,
So
you're
you
all
don't,
over.
yeah, you don't have to
Yeah.
live in a particular area
Okay.
to be competent in that area, but you do have to have access
Right.
to the MLS and the local assessor records and know your way around. So there could be somebody coming in from out of the area that maybe worked under another appraiser
Mhm.
or worked close with other agents that are local,
Right.
and they are competent in the market.
Okay,
So you do see some of that, but most of the time, people live and work in the area that they appraise in.
yeah. Well, I know back in the day, I think we had someone like from the New York City area that, I mean, it was a disaster, and actually the bank realized, and it went to another appraiser, because he wasn't competent in this area, but I didn't know they had to.
Yeah, well, a lot of our local lenders, the
Yeah.
local banks,
Right,
you have to be on their panel.
right,
And most of the people, I would imagine all the people on the panel are local. So they're competent in the appraisers that they hire.
right,
Some of the larger national banks or AMCs, appraisal management companies,
okay,
they offer they offer a lesser fee. So a lot of us, appraisers that are local, that are established, we don't want to do that work. They're a little more, your appraisal's a little more scrutinized.
Right.
They ask for more,
Mhm.
and then they want to pay you less.
right,
Because
Right.
the AMC is like a third party, and they take a portion of the appraisal fee.
okay,
So
that
the-
makes sense.
So
Yeah.
some of those, larger national banks may have some people come in from out of town.
Right.
And and that may be what happened with you. And the person might
Yeah.
not be competent in the market, but, they're getting that appraisal order because, they're willing to do
Right.
that work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how are appraisers picked, right? Isn't it computer generated? You're all in a pool and but,
Yeah, so if you're on an appraisal panel for a particular lender, then it's supposed to be like a round robin basis,
Right.
basically. So, as an appraisal order comes up, it just goes to the next appraiser in line.
Right, so it's not like we're calling, or we're asking the bank, hey, could you call Sam for us? We want Sam.
No,
No.
no, but I mean, if it is a local bank, like say, for example, Pioneer Bank, right?
Okay,
So let's say, I did an appraisal last year of a particular house, and Pioneer has that in their system, then they might send me out there because I'm already,
you're already, yeah,
yeah, I'm
Okay.
already aware of the situation, and I've been to the house already, and it might be an easier process.
okay.
But that's up to
Yeah.
that's up to the bank themselves.
To the bank, how they.
Yeah,
But if a seller calls you, or I know I've called you directly, in fact, like 2 weeks ago, that I had someone that wanted to put a house on the market but wanted an appraisal, so that obviously different, I picked up the phone, I called you,
right.
and you did the appraisal, so, do you recommend sellers getting the house appraised before it goes on the market?
Well, I mean, from a business decision, I want to say yes.
Yeah,
But most of the time, a lot of our agents, we're lucky local.
yeah, right.
I feel like we have a lot of knowledgeable real estate agents.
Mhm.
So if you have somebody that is knowledgeable in the market, then they should be able to list that
Right.
accordingly. But a lot of times we'll get called in when there's a disagreement between an
Right.
agent and the seller.
Right, a big spread.
A big spread.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then the agent might call me, or the seller might call me and say, could you do an appraisal on my house? Because,
Right.
I don't agree. I want to use this agent. I don't want to leave him or her, but
Right.
I want to be listed properly. Will you come in and give an appraisal? Yeah.
Right. And I mean, sometimes unique properties where there's really, how do you comp this?
Right.
So that's when, you're
Yeah.
called in because your expertise, because you've seen, and sometimes you have to go out of the area, maybe, right, up north. I think we had something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
The
really, you have to
concern.
go to where you can find something similar.
Right.
And if it's a really unique property, then you have to take in consideration your market.
Right.
Like who's buying that house, they're
Yeah.
not gonna limit their search parameters maybe to just a certain area if they're looking for a particular house.
Right.
So then we would expand our search areas for comparable sales.
How far
Right.
back do you go when you're looking for comps in today's market?
Well, the lenders really wanna, they don't wanna see you go any farther back than a year.
Okay,
So like Fannie Mae requirements are to have 3 comparable sales within a year. And they would like to see them within 6 months.
I was gonna say, I thought it was, a tighter,
Yeah.
okay,
They would like to see them within 6 months, but we are allowed to go out a year.
To go out, okay.
And technically, it's up to the appraiser how far back they go. So if for example, if you have a unique property, or say you have some, like a monstrosity on Saratoga Lake,
right,
I can't limit myself to the sales
Yeah.
within the past year.
right,
So, you'd have to go farther back. And,
Mhm.
for example, I got appraisal order in the city of Hudson, which I know pretty well. And it was a multifamily, and it was a high-end multifamily,
Mhm.
and there was only one sale in the past year.
oh,
So
yeah,
I told the lender I have to go over a year, or I'm not gonna be able to give you a competent appraisal, and they allowed me to expand over a year.
so you have to ask the bank for permission first before you go over the year?
I will,
And
because you wanna be upfront with what's available.
Right,
So at least at that point, you could, everybody's on the same page. I don't really wanna waste a borrower's money
right,
if I'm just gonna, not be able, I wanna be able to produce a credible report.
right, right,
And so in order to do that, I just figure you might as well be upfront with the lender.
okay,
And,
yeah, that
you
makes
know,
sense.
And it was a local bank, so they were okay with it.
Yeah.
They understood,
Okay,
yeah.
good. How does the bank appraisal process work? And at what point are you called in?
We usually are never called in until you have the meeting of the minds, right?
Right.
Until you have that executed contract.
Yeah.
So once that contract's executed, then the bank will order an appraisal. And it'll go out to the appraiser, and then at that point, they'll reach out to, if it's a for sale by owner, they'll reach directly out to the sellers.
Right,
But if it's listed, then they'll reach out to the listing agent most of the time.
right,
Unless the lender, is asking you to reach out to the buyer's agent for some reason. And sometimes, they ask that.
yeah,
Um,
I think we've had that happen
Yeah,
a few
it
times.
depends.
It's not common, but it does happen.
Right.
What happens if a house is not appraised for the contract price?
Well, we get yelled at.
Yeah.
A lot of pressure. No, I mean, at that point, there's a few things that could happen. The lender's gonna look at it and say, are the people putting enough money down where the appraised value doesn't matter
Mhm.
as much, or If it's a, say it's a tight, people are tight on funds,
right,
then, they may have to go back to negotiation to renegotiate it.
right.
So what can you do to, what can you do as a buyer's agent? And it's really the buyer's agent. So there is something that's called the reconsideration of value.
Okay,
So Fannie put that in place to where, if an appraisal comes in under contract price, then the buyer and the buyer's agent can provide the lender with comparable sales that they feel the appraiser should look at.
that were in your report.
That were not in our report.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the lender, the underwriter is supposed to review those sales and see if they're credible, and if they in fact may help, or help the buyer in terms
Right.
of the value, the market value being increased, and send them to the appraiser. Then the appraiser will review them, and they have to, if they feel they're credible, then they would put them in the report and alter the
Right.
appraised value, or they'd have to describe why they didn't use them or why they don't think they're comparable.
Has that happened to you a lot?
Not a lot, but it has happened a
Yeah.
couple times. Yeah, I mean, I actually have one recently that came in under contract price. And most of the time, I tell every agent the same thing. If you're, like if you list a house, right,
Mhm.
and you've been doing this a long time,
Yeah.
pretty good at what you do,
Yeah.
and you really think that house, the market value of that house is $350,
Right,
so you put it on the market for $349.9, and it goes to contract for $400. Why am I going to be able to find sales for $400,000? To
right,
be able to support that. The chances are I'm not. So, it's probably going to be an appraised value that's going to come in less than contract price.
so obviously now there's no inventory.
Right.
So homes are hitting the market, they're going on the market at where the listing agents are running the comps at the fair market value. And now they're going way above asking because there's no inventory.
Right.
So how do you appraise a house? Is it listed, 400,000 and you have an offer at 480?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you, because the listing agent has done their job at the fair market value, but you have a buyer that's willing to pay way over that.
Yeah, so the willingness, there was a gentleman that I worked for when I was working with my dad in the beginning that always used to say worth does not equal value.
Right,
So,
Right.
What is the house worth to an individual buyer? It's
Exactly.
not what the market value of that house is.
Yeah.
So there are some factors that we may take into play, into the consideration that you guys might not. And one of the things, and Fannie's been pushing this a lot lately, is to do market condition adjustments or time adjustments.
okay,
So,
that makes sense, yeah.
so then we would go back to like the contract price and see which way the market's moving. And if there's an increase in the market, then we would make an adjustment against that comparable sale, which could help the case, in the
Right.
appraised value.
To an
right?
appraise.
Right.
And again, houses that are going way over the list price, I know a lot of, listing agents are saying, if you've made such a high offer, you'll have to cover the appraisal gap. So if it's not appraising, they're ready to put in, that extra money
Yeah.
with the bank to get that to work. We're seeing that a lot, so.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. And the other thing that I think that agents have to take into consideration, and what I see a lot of, is a house going to contract for over list price, and then they're adding a concession on
Oh,
top
yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
So concessions are not supposed to, are not allowed to be a factor in market value for us.
Okay,
So a concession actually comes off a comp, like dollar for dollar. So if you have a house that's sold for $290 with a $10,000 concession, really in our appraisal report it's $280,000.
right,
Yeah, so that I see a little bit of is them adding a significant concession on top,
right.
and then it's hard to.
Then it's hard to appraise, and if it doesn't,
Right.
you really can't, because some of those buyers need that concession, to get to the closing table.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of concessions nowadays.
I-
Are you seeing a lot,
Well,
or?
I would say maybe 20. If I had to take a guess, 20 to 30% of the orders that come over
Okay.
to us have concession on them.
All right,
Yeah,
now, it
so
used to be much higher.
It was definitely much higher.
Way before COVID. It was
Yeah.
a lot of house to sell and, utilizing VA, so if someone's doing a VA loan, I know those concessions are built in there, which they should be.
Right.
You know, but those can impact, you know, the appraisal. Do you do VA appraisals, or am I
not.
wrong? There's a separate appraiser,
There's,
right?
there's a VA panel.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I just never applied for it, and now I think it'd be difficult to get on, because there's enough,
There's enough.
VA appraisers
Yeah.
locally in the area.
Okay, I know I just threw that one at you.
Yeah.
But I knew you'd be able to handle it. You know, I do have a question on here, because when we were talking about appraisals, a lot of times the listing agents like to be at the house when the appraiser shows up, and they usually have their folder and supporting comps. How does that affect upgrades and everything? If they're handing you a list, here's all the updates and everything that they've done in the last, few years. Does that impact your appraisal?
Well, all the data and information that we can get up front is great.
Okay,
Most of the time we'll notice that, during our walkthrough,
Right.
during our observation of the house, but it's still nice to have in front of you. So then when you go back to your desk, you have all that information right there.
right. So it is important. So for a seller to
Yeah.
get that information to their agent, which, the agents are asking, when the work was done and an estimated value for that.
Right.
So,
And most of the appraisers that I talk to, and there's a few that we speak regularly, especially if, there's something that, we don't have like peers that are in our office, like a lot of other people do.
right,
So if we, get jammed up on something or can't figure something out, or, need to, somebody to look at something and realize we're not losing our mind.
right.
And there's a few of us that kind of chat, and I don't think there's anybody that has a problem with an agent giving them a folder
Right,
of information. In comparable sales, we like to see where your mind is,
right,
and how you guys came up with that list price.
yeah.
Yeah.
And because a lot of work goes into, trying to find those numbers and, getting the right price,
Right.
for a seller. So.
Yeah.
What are some things that can delay an appraisal? And what should buyers and sellers be aware of to keep things on track?
So delayed in terms of like once it's ordered.
Yeah,
You're thinking?
yeah,
So I would say access to the property
Mhm.
is always a big one. And that's always a bigger issue in multifamilies, when it's difficult to get in with tenants, or tenants weren't aware, that we were coming.
or that the house was on or the property was on the market.
Yeah, exactly. So access, and a lot of us, like the appraisers that I know that I speak to, a lot of us will go in certain areas on certain days. So, maybe on Monday you're going to Saratoga County, and then Tuesday you're in Albany County. So then an order comes over in Saratoga County, and you try to get in on the day you're there.
Right,
And if you can't, then unfortunately you may lose a couple days for that appraiser to be able to reschedule that.
okay,
So I always say, it's, if you can, as an agent, if you can get us in when we're trying to get in,
Right.
it's easier. It'll at least it'll be seen sooner,
right,
than the next time that we could get there. And the other thing that I've seen, and I don't see it as much in the capital region, but for some reason up north in the southern, areas, Columbia and Greene County, is the executed contracts. So we need to have an executed contract in front of us before we can complete the appraisal.
okay,
So technically, like for FHA, we're supposed to, have an executed contract before we even schedule an appraisal.
Right.
And a lot of times, we'll get a contract that comes over that's not signed by both parties, and at that point, it would hold the process up.
right. So who is giving you that contract? Not the bank?
Well, the lender. Yeah, but they'll give us whatever they have. So if, they get it from either the buyer or the buyer's agent, and if the contract that the buyer's agent gives the lender is not executed, then that's what they're gonna give us.
Okay, I would think
Yeah.
the lender would kick it back and be like, can we have a signed
Well, they
copy?
do,
I
they
mean,
put
yeah.
pressure on them, but, I mean, a lot of times it's the attorneys maybe taking, a little
Yeah.
too much time,
Yeah.
or, a seller that just hasn't signed yet.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And they, even down in Columbia County, contracts are executed different than they do here. Here, the agents are filling out the contract. Down there,
The attorney.
it's right, it's like a letter of intent, and then it goes to the attorneys.
Yeah, it's a binder first.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's the attorney, and those, those attorneys like to take their time.
Yeah, that takes, so that could hold up.
Yeah, that'll hold the process
We do
up.
some business down there, and it's always, where's the contract? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
It's coming, when?
Right.
Couple weeks, and you're like, oh boy.
Yep.
But that's how, how they do, business down there. So I think we have it lucky here, how we do it. From your experience, what can a seller do to prepare their home to support an appraisal?
I think, I kind of go off of what I hear from agents. Without putting significant renovations into the home. It makes our job easier if we can see what's there, so declutter.
Right,
Get things off the floor so we can see what kind of flooring is there and the condition of that.
right,
And again, allow us access, right? Allow us
When you
access
need it, yeah.
to everything. A lot of times you'll show up and, there's a baby sleeping in the room, or, there's dogs in a bathroom, and, you can't get in there to take a picture. Then,
Right.
Which, might shuffle things around a little bit, but I think sometimes the sellers don't understand that, just because there's photos on the MLS, doesn't mean that we don't have to take our pictures.
Right.
The bank requires us to take a picture of everything,
right,
and
yeah,
original photos of everything. And I think the biggest reason for that is that a lot of realtors you guys take professional photos.
correct.
So the house looks a lot better than it
Yeah,
looks like in a
then if
normal
you're taking
picture.
it with your,
Yeah.
your cell phone.
Right.
So, is it okay for homeowners to be there when you do the appraisal? That
Yeah.
doesn't really
I
matter
don't
to
mind
you,
it.
right?
No, I don't mind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then, I think COVID got most of us used to it. I mean, of course, it's great if nobody's there.
Right,
An agent's there, let us in, we can, do our thing and get
Yeah.
out. But, ever since COVID came, I feel like everybody's working.
yeah,
And most of
Yeah.
the people understand, that if they're in a room and, they're on their computer, I'll just say, hey, let me get a quick picture of that, and then you can sit down and keep
Right,
working again,
right.
and then they go right to work, and I just do my thing.
yeah. And you guys aren't there long. I mean, you're there enough, but it's not,
As long as it takes us to do what we have to do. So the more complex house and, the bigger home may take a little longer to measure, and get our notes and take everything that we need to take.
Right.
But for the most part, no, we're, if you see an appraiser running in and out in 10 minutes, I think that's a problem.
yeah.
But they should do their due diligence and get everything they need.
Yeah, to get in and out.
Yeah.
I had a great question I wanted to ask you, and I just lost my train of thought. I had to start writing stuff down. It will pop, believe me. I'll be like, hey, Sam, I remember. Tell us about the secondary markets, Fannie, FHA, and what's new coming down the pipe. You alluded to that, I think, last week.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that Fannie's pushing is market conditions. They want to see what's going on in the market, and I don't really think it gears as much towards our market, because we're always like top 5 in the country for most recession-proof real estate markets.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, knock
Yeah.
on wood.
Yeah,
But we're a very solid real estate market. We don't see the crazy highs,
yeah.
that some of the other markets see, but we also don't crash
You're
like
right.
a lot of them
Yeah.
do. I mean, if you look around, if somebody watches the national news and sees what's going on with the rest of the country, they think that our real estate market is shot.
Exactly. We
And-
talked about that yesterday with Carrie,
Yeah.
talking about, real estate is local.
Right.
And not to really listen to the national, because what's happening in Florida or, California, it does not apply here.
No.
I think we're insulated too, like you said, we're in a very good area.
Yeah,
We're
and
thankful
you
for
can
that.
still get a reasonable home for a reasonable price. But the one thing that Fannie's looking for is they're looking for, they want to see really what is going on in our market. Is the market moving? Is it going up? Is it going down? And then they want to see those, explanations or graphs in our appraisal reports.
Okay,
And then they want to see the adjustments made if needed.
and that's all spelled out in the reports that also, to the bank and to the buyer.
Yeah,
Buyer gets a copy of the appraisal report.
yeah.
Sometimes when we go on listing appointments, a seller will say, oh, I had my house appraised last year. And when you start asking, some further questions, it's because they did a refinance.
Mhm.
So how is a refinance appraisal different from a buyer purchasing a house for an appraisal?
It shouldn't be.
You don't think so?
No.
Don't some of the appraisers try to do like a different, it has to be so much of the money they're taking out?
They shouldn't.
Okay.
No. So I mean, unless you're doing like a restrictive appraisal for like a local bank for a HELOC maybe,
Okay,
and they may ask for like a letter of some sort, like just is the house, is the market value of the house at least $100,000?
okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
because they're a long time bank affiliate. They're a long time bank not employee but customer.
customer, right, good
And
credit,
they don't know anything on
yeah.
their house, and they're just doing a quick HELOC, and the bank knows the house is worth $500,000.
Okay,
And, something like that. But if an appraisal is an appraisal, an appraiser should walk into any appraisal the same way.
Okay.
and value that home the same way.
The same way,
Yep,
okay.
and it shouldn't matter if it's a refi, a purchase, if it's for divorce purposes or estate or, for, IRS purposes.
Right,
There's some different wording and some, IRS has a different, definition of market value that you have to include in.
Mhm.
But overall, the appraisal should be, the same process should happen, no matter
Okay.
what's going on.
so if someone has an appraisal for a refi that happened 2 years ago, you think that that's still valid? I mean, it should be updated, right? Yeah.
It definitely should be updated.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, the market's always moving.
right,
So,
Right.
and you never know. Could it be the same value? Absolutely, you could have the same market value. But I would think you would want to get a new appraisal done because, the lender would definitely want to get a new appraisal done.
yeah.
Most appraisals, they don't really want to use over 3 months.
When you do an appraisal, and let's say for whatever reason the deal falls apart, does that appraisal live somewhere for the next buyer to come along, and then when it's assigned to a different appraiser, and they put in the address, do they already see an appraisal was done?
So,
Is that all in your programs, or?
yeah, so there's something that's called the Uniform Appraisal Data Set.
Okay,
UAD through Fannie Mae. So every appraisal that's done for mortgage purposes is put in that data set.
okay,
So the appraisal will be there, but for conventional financing, a new appraisal is needed every time.
okay,
For FHA financing, for a certain period of time, and I don't remember, I think it's 90 days maybe? I don't
that
remember
sounds,
offhand.
yeah,
But that
okay,
appraisal will kind of follow that house. So, if somebody applies for an FHA mortgage, then HUD will have that appraisal there, and that lender could use that appraisal for their buyer.
so you mentioned FHA. When you're doing an appraisal for a conventional buyer versus an FHA buyer, is there different things you have to look at or take into consideration?
Well, yeah, so there's FHA guidelines
Mhm.
that differ from, the guidelines that are conventional guidelines. Fannie has a lot of their, they have their book, and then the HUD, book is it's called 4000.1.
Okay,
And, some of the things that you guys always, worry about would be like chip and peeling paint,
mhm,
any health and safety concerns, handrails,
Cracked
is there missing
windows,
sidings,
yeah.
cracked windows, the distance between well and septic.
Yeah.
In the more rural areas, always a problem. Everybody's always worried about that. You need 50 feet between well and septic, 100 between well and leach field.
yeah,
And then at least 10 feet to the property line. So if that, like for example, if that is not the case, then that could be a deal killer right away.
even if it's an older property,
Yeah, so grandfathered, any grandfathered, local municipal, may have a grandfathered clause for the distance between well and septic, but HUD doesn't.
oh, okay, so
So-
regardless, it has to be taken into account.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
and so you have a small lot, say, 50 by 100 lot, and the well's in the front, and then the septic's like on the side,
Mhm.
and it's say 30 feet apart, then chances are you can't get an FHA mortgage on that.
Wow. So either the seller has to move it, which is probably not gonna happen,
Not gonna
right?
happen.
Or you gotta change the type of financing.
Change the financing,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Sim, I had a bunch of questions, but I think as we were talking, right, did I miss anything that you wanna get out, to the public that they really need to know about the appraisal process?
Well, I think one of the things that the questions that always pops up is, the what's the gross living area of a home? And how big is my house? And some of the things that I notice on the MLS sheets are, agents use the assessor records a lot.
Right,
So I always tell the agents, don't price, if you're not sure of the actual gross living area of that home, have it measured. Have it measured by an appraiser, or have it measured by a contractor, somebody that could measure that house accordingly. Because if you price your home at, let's say the assessor record says it's 1,840 square feet.
right,
And then an appraiser comes in and measures it at 1,300.
right,
You price that home at 1,840 square feet.
yeah,
And now we have to appraise it at 1,300 square feet.
yeah.
So-
Someone's not gonna be happy.
Yeah, yeah, so that's always something that comes up on our end, is, the gross discrepancy in gross living
Yeah.
area.
And we rely on those public records.
And some of them are good, and if
Yeah.
you have a newer home that was newly built, new construction, I mean,
Right.
plans are on
Builder
record.
plans,
the chances
Yeah.
are it's spot on.
Yeah.
But some of the like old bungalows or capes, I see a lot of discrepancy in
Yeah,
the square footage.
interesting.
And the other thing too is, no matter what is going on in the basement, no matter how it's set up,
Right.
it's never can be included in the gross living area.
Even if it's, well, you walk out, you can't. It's all four sides have to be,
It has to, the entire area has to be at grade.
right.
And that's not like a decision of the appraiser, that was pretty made in stone by Fannie Mae.
Right.
So then all appraisers would be on the same page.
How do you take in consideration a finished basement? That is.
I mean, sometimes if it's, finished to the same condition, quality as the rest of the house, you may value it similar to the rest of the house.
Okay, so really
Yeah.
depending, but if it's just sheet rocked and, a throw rug down, it's a different,
It would be a different value, like I've done them on Saratoga Lake where, you live in the basement.
Yeah.
I mean, you walk out to the lake with a beautiful patio,
Yeah.
and, slide indoors and big bar. I mean, that value would be, that basement would be valued significantly.
different, okay, yeah, basements are always challenging to try to, get that into the comps. I know sometimes we've come across an appraiser asking, does a finished basement have a CO? Is that,
Well, we're not really code enforcement officers.
Right, yeah.
So, unless it's new, right?
Yeah.
Unless the area is new
Mhm.
and completely brand new, it's a newer home, then, that may be an issue, that the MCO wasn't done
Right.
properly.
right,
Is it safe? But if it's old and existing, chances are the appraiser's not gonna ask because, like, again, we're not code enforcement officers.
Yeah,
Our
yeah.
job is to value what's there
yeah.
and then observe and report,
Right.
basically.
I've had a couple, just through 26 years, and I've heard a couple agents, and I'm like, what? But, it does happen. Not a lot, but it does happen.
Yeah.
Have we covered everything? Did we miss anything?
I don't think so. I think we did a
We could
pretty
probably
good job.
talk forever,
Yeah,
right? But,
yeah.
all right, wonderful. Well, Sam, could you tell our listeners how to get a hold of you?
Unfortunately, I'm very old school, so my phone number is 518-542-7774, Olde Kinderhook Appraisal Service. If you ever have any needs for an appraiser, feel free to give me a call. And if I can't do it, I'll find you somebody that can.
Yeah.
So.
And Sam, just so you know, we'll have all of your contact information in our show notes. And certainly if anybody, needs to get a hold of Sam and you can't, just give someone at Sterling Real Estate Group a call and we'll get to you right away.
Thanks, Lisa.
So Sam, I appreciate it.
No problem.
And thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having
much.
me.
Hope to have you back again.
All right.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.